there is a moment, and you have felt it, when the noise becomes unbearable, not just the noise outside, the traffic, and the conversations, and the notifications, and the endless stream of opinions flooding your screen. But the noise inside, the constant narration your mind runs over everything. The replaying of old conversations. The rehearsing of future ones. The commentary, the criticism, the planning, the worrying, and somewhere beneath all of that, buried so deep, you have almost forgotten it exists, there is something that does not make noise at all. Something that simply watches. Something that simply knows. The Stoics called it the ruling faculty, the hegemonikon, the innermost self that exists before thought, beneath language, and beyond the reach of chaos. And they believed, with absolute conviction, that your access to that faculty, your access to your own deepest strength, depended entirely on one practice, one discipline, one ancient and almost forgotten art: silence, not silence as absence, not silence as emptiness, but silence as a weapon, silence as a doorway, silence as the beginning of everything real. Welcome to Stoic Zeno, the channel where ancient wisdom meets the demands of modern life. If this is your first time here, I want you to know that what we explore on this channel is not philosophy for classrooms or libraries. It is philosophy for the battlefield of daily living. For every moment when the world is loud, and your mind is louder, and you need something solid to hold on to. If that speaks to you, subscribe to Stoic Zeno right now so you never miss what we bring you. And if this video gives you something, a shift, a pause, a moment of clarity, please like it and share it with someone who needs it. Drop a comment below and tell me, when was the last time you were truly silent? I read every single one. Today, we are going into something that will challenge you, something that runs against everything the modern world has trained you to be. We are going to talk about why your greatest power is not in what you say. It is not even in what you think. It is in what you stop doing. It is in the discipline of stillness, the practice of silence, and of the transformation that becomes possible the moment you stop filling every space with noise. In the 2nd century, a Roman emperor sat alone most mornings before the demands of empire consumed him. He did not sit to relax, he did not sit to escape, he sat to examine, he sat to sharpen, he sat to prepare himself for what the day would require, not with more thinking, but with the kind of deep deliberate stillness that allowed him to see clearly. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, which we now call the Meditations, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He wrote those words not as a poet reflecting on beauty. He wrote them as a soldier, a judge, a ruler, a man surrounded at every hour by voices competing for his attention, his resources, his decisions. And he knew something that most people never discover. That the quieter the inner world becomes, the more powerful the outer life grows. This is where we must begin. Not with tactics, not with habits, not with productivity frameworks or morning routines. We must begin with the recognition that silence is not something you find. It is something you create, and creating it requires a form of courage that very few people are willing to exercise. We live in an age that pathologizes silence. Think about what happens when a conversation pauses for more than 3 seconds. Someone immediately fills it. Think about what happens when you are alone in a car, without music or a podcast. There is an almost physical discomfort. Think about what happens the moment you wake up in the morning. How quickly your hand reaches for your phone before you have even breathed deeply. We have been conditioned, systemically, and thoroughly, to treat silence as a problem, as something broken that needs to be fixed, as a void that must be filled. But the Stoics understood that this conditioning was not wisdom. It was weakness. It was the behavior of a mind that had never been trained, that had been allowed to run wild like an untethered horse, pulling the rider wherever its impulses led. Epictetus, who taught from nothing, a man who had been a slave, who owned almost no material possessions, said this with the directness that made him one of the most powerful teachers who ever lived. "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." But he meant something deeper than simply being a good listener in conversation. He meant that the ratio of intake to output, of reception to expression, of listening to speaking, that ratio was a measure of wisdom itself. The man who speaks constantly reveals that he has not yet learned the discipline of his own mind. The man who listens, who is genuinely, completely, silently present, is operating from a place of mastery that most people will never reach. Let us talk about what happens in your brain when you are silent. Not metaphorically, literally. Neuroscience has spent decades studying the default mode network, the system that activates when your brain is not focused on an external task. For most people, the default mode network runs noise, it runs rumination, it runs the replaying of past events and the anxious projection of future ones. It runs comparison and self-criticism, and a kind of low-level panic that most people have simply come to accept as normal. This is the condition of the untrained mind. This is the mind that the Stoics were warning about thousands of years before neuroscience had the language to describe it. But something different happens when the silence goes deep, when you are not just quiet in your environment but genuinely still within, when you stop talking and stop the compulsive loop of thinking. The brain begins to do something remarkable. It integrates. It processes. It consolidates experience into wisdom. The insights that you have been chasing in podcasts and books and conversations begin to surface on their own because you finally stopped burying them under more input. The clarity that you have been seeking in productivity systems and planning sessions arrives naturally because you stopped cluttering the space it needed to emerge. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." The insanity he was describing was not clinical, it was the ordinary madness of the unexamined life. The life lived entirely on the surface, entirely in reaction, entirely in noise. The life where you are always responding to what the world throws at you but never, not once, stopping to ask what you actually think, what you actually feel, what you actually want. What actually matters. Here is a truth that will be uncomfortable for many people. Most of what you say is not necessary, most of what you think is not useful, and nearly all of your talking and thinking is not producing the results you believe it is. Consider how many conversations you have had in the last month that were genuinely productive, that changed something, that moved something forward, that created something real. Now consider how many were performance. How many were anxiety wearing the costume of communication? How many were talking because you were afraid that if you stopped talking, people would see that you did not have it figured out? How many were filler? How many were habit? How many were noise? The Stoics were brutally honest about this. Seneca, who wrote letters that still feel like they were written for this exact moment, said, "It is not that I am brave enough to say what many men think, but that I am free enough to say what many men will not admit." And one of the things that men and women will not admit is that a significant portion of their speech is driven not by wisdom or care or genuine connection, but by fear. Fear of being overlooked, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being alone with what they actually know about themselves. Silence strips that away. Silence confronts you with exactly who you are when no one is watching and nothing is performing, and that confrontation, terrifying as it is the beginning of every genuine transformation. There is a concept in Stoic philosophy called Prosoche. It is often translated as attention or self-attention, but that translation does not fully capture what the Stoics meant. Prosoche was the practice of continuous vigilant self-observation, not self-absorption, not navel-gazing, but a clear, unflinching awareness of your own inner state, your impressions, your impulses, your automatic reactions, so that you could respond with reason rather than simply react with habit. You cannot practice Prosoche in noise, you cannot observe your own mind while simultaneously flooding it with input. The mind that is always consuming, always listening to something, always scrolling, always in conversation, never has the space to see itself clearly, and a mind that cannot see itself clearly is not a free mind. It is a mind that is being driven by forces it does not even recognize. Old patterns, inherited fears, social conditioning, the accumulated residue of every voice that has ever told you who you are supposed to be. Silence is how you begin to separate yourself from all of that. Silence is how you begin to locate what is genuinely yours. Your actual values, your real convictions, the things you would still believe and still choose if no one was watching and no one was judging, and the noise fell away entirely. This is not easy. It is one of the hardest things a person can undertake, because when the noise stops, everything you have been running from becomes audible. The grief you have not processed, the fear you have not faced, the questions you have not answered, the decisions you have been postponing by staying busy and staying loud and staying constantly surrounded by stimulation. But here is what the Stoics knew: the pain of confronting those things in silence is far less than the pain of spending your life carrying them in noise. The discomfort of sitting with your own mind for an hour is nothing compared to the suffering of a decade lived out of alignment with who you actually are. Let us talk about focus. Because the title of this video makes a promise, and I intend to keep it. The promise is this: when you stop talking and stop the compulsive machinery of thought, something else becomes possible. Not emptiness, not absence, but focus of a quality that most people in the modern world have never experienced. The word focus comes from the Latin word for hearth, for the center of the home. The place where the fire burned and the family gathered. When you focus, truly focus, you are not narrowing, you are centering, you are drawing all of your scattered energy back to the hearth. Back to the place where things actually burn, where things actually produce heat and light. Marcus Aurelius understood focus not as a productivity tool, but as a moral discipline. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." Just 3 words. But those 3 words contain an entire practice. The mind that is scattered across past conversations and future anxieties is not in the present, it is everywhere except here. And a mind that is everywhere except here cannot act with the precision, the care, and the power that the present moment demands. When Stoic philosophy talks about the present, it is not talking about mindfulness in the soft sense that has become fashionable. It is talking about a warrior's relationship with reality, the soldier who is thinking about last week's battle or next week's strategy, while the present fight is happening, will lose. Not because he is not intelligent, but because he is not here, and the only place where anything can actually be done, the only place where your power exists, is here. Silence is the practice that brings you back to here. Every time, every single time, when you stop filling the present moment with words and thoughts about other moments, you find that the present moment is actually enormous. That it contains everything you need, that the answers you have been looking for by scrolling and searching and consulting and debating are, many of them, already present within you, waiting in the stillness for you to become quiet enough to hear them. Epictetus taught that there are things within our power and things outside our power. This is the foundational distinction of Stoic philosophy, the dichotomy of control, and he was uncompromising about it. What is within your power? Your judgments, your intentions, your responses. What is outside your power? Everything else. Every external event, every other person's behavior, every outcome that depends on factors beyond your own will. Now consider what most talking is about. Most talking is about things outside our control. What other people did, what the news says, what might happen, what should have happened. What is wrong with the world, the system, the situation, the other person. We talk and talk and talk about the unchosen, the unchosen, the unchosen, and in doing so, we give our energy, our precious, finite, irreplaceable energy, to everything that cannot be changed by our energy. Silence redirects you. Silence is the practice of Stoic discipline, in its most literal form, because when you stop talking about what is outside your control, you create space to focus on what is inside it. And when you stop the mental noise that runs commentary on what you cannot change, you create space to act on what you can. This is what the Stoics meant by living according to nature. Not living in the woods. Not rejecting civilization, but living in alignment with the nature of things, including the nature of your own power, which is internal, which is real, and which is most fully accessed, not in noise, but in stillness. There is a story, not from ancient Rome, but from ancient China, that Marcus Aurelius would have recognized immediately. A student comes to a master and says, "Fill my cup with your wisdom." The master begins to pour tea into the student's cup and keeps pouring even as the tea overflows, spills across the table, runs onto the floor. The student cries out, "Stop, the cup is full." And the master says, "Like this cup, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you wisdom unless you first empty your cup?" This story is not about humility in the social sense. It is not about deferring to others or suppressing your voice. it is about the fundamental truth that a mind that is always full, always producing, always broadcasting, always running on maximum volume, cannot receive anything new, cannot integrate what it already knows, cannot access the deeper layers of understanding that exist beneath the surface of constant thought. Silence empties the cup, not permanently. Not in a way that makes you passive or blank, but in a way that creates the receptivity, the space, the internal room that wisdom requires. The Stoics practiced this deliberately. They called it negative visualization, the deliberate removal of assumption, comfort, and noise, so that the mind could see clearly. They practiced voluntary hardship so they would not be slaves to comfort. They practiced silence, so they would not be slaves to noise. Let us be practical. Because Stoic philosophy is nothing if not practical. It is not a set of beautiful ideas that belong on posters, it is a set of disciplines that transform behavior. So what does this actually look like? What does it mean to practice silence in a life that is structured around constant stimulation? It begins in the morning. The first hour of your day is the most important hour, and most people give it immediately to their phone. To other people's realities, other people's opinions, the world's agenda before they have even established their own. The Stoics understood that the morning was sacred. Not in a religious sense but in a functional one. The morning mind is soft, it is impressionable, whatever you let in first will shape the tone of everything that follows. Marcus Aurelius began his mornings in reflection. He did not reach for the scrolls of petitioners and military reports the moment he woke. He sat with himself first, he examined the day ahead, he reminded himself of his values, his purpose, the kind of person he intended to be by the time the day ended. He wrote. Not to produce something for others, but to clarify something for himself. You do not need an empire to do what Marcus Aurelius did. You need 20 minutes, 15, even. The practice is simple. Before you speak to anyone, before you look at your phone, before you turn on any media, sit in silence. Not passively, actively. Look at your own mind. What is already running? What are you anxious about? What is pulling at you? What do you actually value today? Let the noise that is already inside you become visible, so that it does not run you without your awareness. This is not meditation in the technical sense, though there is nothing wrong with meditation. This is Prosoche. This is the Stoic practice of watching yourself, so that you are the one in charge of your inner life, rather than the passenger of it. The second practice is what we might call the discipline of deliberate speech. The Stoics were not hermits. They were not antisocial, they were engaged with the world. Deeply, actively, consequentially engaged. But they were selective about their speech, in a way that modern culture has entirely abandoned. Epictetus gave a direct instruction that sounds radical today. Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life. And then he added this. Silence is safer than speech. Not because speech is bad, but because unexamined speech, speech that has not passed through the filter of reason and intention, almost always causes more harm than good. It reveals what should not be revealed. It commits what should not be committed. It escalates what should be allowed to settle. The practice of deliberate speech begins with a single pause. Before you respond in conversation, in text, in email, in argument, pause. 1 breath. 2. In that pause, ask yourself, is this true? Is this necessary? Is this kind? And if it is none of those things, release it. Let it return to silence. This is not suppression. This is wisdom. This is the recognition that your words are a resource, and like all resources, they produce their greatest value when they are used with intention rather than wasted in excess. The third practice is the discipline of the evening. Just as the morning requires silence before the day begins, the evening requires silence before the mind can rest. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius about the practice of daily review. The examination of everything that had happened, everything that had been done, everything that had been said. He called it the examination of the day's account. What did I do today that I would not have done had I been at my best? Where did I speak when I should have been silent? Where did I react when I should have responded? Where did I allow noise to overtake reason? This evening review is not self-punishment, it is calibration. It is the practice of a craftsman who examines the day's work not to condemn himself, but to improve his craft. The goal is not perfection, the goal is direction, and direction requires clarity. And clarity, always, requires silence. Now let us speak about something that may be the most powerful and the most difficult aspect of this entire practice. Let us speak about the silence that is not just the absence of external noise or the discipline of deliberate speech. Let us speak about the silence of the ego. The ego is the loudest thing in most people's lives. Not because it announces itself, but because it runs the narrative. The constant story of who you are, who you need to be seen as, what you deserve, what has been done to you, why you are right, why they are wrong. The ego is the great manufacturer of internal noise, and it is extraordinarily clever. It disguises itself as reason. It pretends to be your authentic voice. It hijacks your values and your convictions and uses them as weapons to maintain the story it has built about who you are. The Stoics did not have our language for the ego, but they understood the phenomenon exactly. They called it the phantom of the self, the false impression of who you are that the unexamined mind constructs, and then defends at all costs. And they were clear that wisdom, genuine, transformative, life-altering wisdom, required the willingness to let that phantom go. To sit in silence long enough for the constructed self to become transparent. To see, underneath all the noise and all the story, what actually remains. What remains when the ego finally quiets is something very simple, not nothing. Something, awareness. The capacity to perceive, to choose, to respond, the ruling faculty that Stoic philosophy pointed toward. The inner citadel that Marcus Aurelius described. The place within the self, that the world cannot touch, that events cannot break, that circumstances cannot define. The place where your true strength lives. This is what silence opens, not the silence of surrender, not the silence of apathy, or passivity, or giving up, but the silence of arrival, the silence of someone who has found the center and no longer needs the noise to know who they are. Here is what changes when you commit to this practice. And I want to be clear. It is a practice. It is not a switch you flip, it is not a revelation that arrives once and stays forever. It is a daily discipline, imperfect and ongoing, like all of the most important things in a human life, but here is what changes. Your words begin to carry weight, not because you perform more carefully, but because they are scarcer and more intentional. When you speak less, people listen more. Not because you have become more clever or more impressive, but because what you say is no longer diluted by the vast ocean of unnecessary words that surrounded it before. Your decisions become cleaner. The mental clarity that accumulates through consistent silence allows you to see options, consequences, and values more clearly than you can in the fog of constant stimulation. You begin to trust your own judgment. Not because you have become arrogant, but because you have actually listened to it for the first time. Your relationships deepen. It sounds counterintuitive. Less talking, deeper connection. But yes, when you are truly present, not composing your response, not managing your impression, not running the commentary of the ego, you actually hear the other person, and being truly heard is one of the rarest and most profound experiences one human being can offer another. Your relationship with yourself transforms. This, perhaps, is the most significant change of all. The person you have been running from in the noise, the one you have been drowning out with sound and stimulation, and constant distraction, turns out not to be something to fear. Turns out to be something to know. And knowing yourself, in the Stoic sense, knowing your values, your limits, your genuine desires, your actual fears, is the foundation of every form of strength that actually matters. Marcus Aurelius wrote, near the end of his life, something that has stayed with me since I first encountered it. He wrote, "Look well into thyself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if thou wilt always look. There is a source of strength that will always spring up, not sometimes, not in the good moments, always, but only if you look. And you cannot look in noise. You can only look in silence," Seneca wrote. Retire into yourself as much as you can, associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those who you yourself can improve. The process is mutual. For men learn while they teach, and the first place to which you must retire, before any other, is the silence of your own inner life. The place where the teaching and learning that matter most actually happen. Epictetus. Stripped of everything the world calls success, sitting with his students with nothing but the authority of a man who had mastered his own mind, said simply, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens," and the best use of what is in your power begins with this. Learning to be still. Learning to be quiet. Learning for the first time, to actually listen, not to the world, but to the deepest part of yourself that has been waiting, patiently, through all the noise, for you to finally stop and hear it. Your strength is not in your volume. It is not in your productivity. It is not in the impressiveness of what you say or the speed of your responses or the size of your presence in every room you enter. Your strength is in the quality of your attention, the depth of your self-knowledge, and the clarity of your purpose. And all three of those things, every single one of them, grow in silence and wither in noise. You do not need to become a monk. You do not need to abandon your life or your relationships or your ambitions. You need to begin, today, with one morning that belongs to you before it belongs to anything else, with one pause before one unnecessary word, with one evening spent in honest examination of what the day actually required and what it did not. Begin small. Begin imperfectly. Begin in the middle of your noise and your chaos and your full, demanding, complicated life. And watch what happens. Watch how the silence, once invited in, begins to change the texture of everything around it. Watch how your words become more powerful because there are fewer of them. Watch how your thoughts become more useful because you are no longer enslaved to all of them. Watch how your focus, finally, genuinely freed from the tyranny of constant stimulation, becomes something that could move mountains. The Stoics did not promise an easy life. They promised a worthy one, a life lived with eyes open and mind clear and will directed at what actually matters. That life is not built in noise. It is built in the difficult, necessary, transformative practice of silence. And it is available to you. Right now, in this moment, as you consider what you are about to do next. Stop talking. Stop thinking. Start focusing. Your true strength begins in silence. If this video reached something in you, if it gave you a pause, a thought, a shift in how you see your own life, then I want you to do something right now. Hit that like button and let this message reach people who need it. Share this video with one person in your life who is drowning in noise and looking for something solid to hold on to. And subscribe to Stoic Zeno, because this is what we do here, every single time. We go deep, we go honest, and we bring you the wisdom that actually changes things. Comment below and tell me, what is one area of your life where you are going to practice silence this week? The inbox, the morning, the argument you almost had. Tell me, I read everything, and I want to hear from you. The Stoics are waiting for you in the quiet. Go there, stay there, and become who you already are, beneath all the noise. This is Stoic Zeno. Until next time, be strong, be still, be free.